the Susie was kind of like setting in a different avenue. So to say that program, I don't know. The past couple episodes, well, the past two, we've seen like, Jerry's parents a lot and this and that. The Susie felt like it was kind of focusing a little more. Well, I don't know what I'm saying with this, but anyways, it felt like a little bit of a different, act in some ways. The thing about how like a little mistake, like getting someone's name wrong can just turn into a big fiasco, and that's what happened to Elaine in the Susie. And we also get reunited with someone who Jerry's still mad at because this guy thinks that Jerry is a phony. And one of Kramer's addictions causes more problems with the whole scenario. And George, meanwhile, is doing everything he can to avoid a breakup. Not because of the woman, but because of a ball he wants to attend. He makes a grand exit. Now he wants to make a grand entrance. Let's talk about the Susie episode of Seinfeld. So I believe it starts off with Jerry and Kramer wandering the streets. And then Jerry then sees Mike Moffat, who is the same guy back in the parking space that not only George argued over backing in or pulling in head first, but also the same guy who had told Kramer that he thinks that Jerry is a phony. Jerry, of course, has not forgotten about that and has not, forgiven Mike for that at all whatsoever. So, of course, Jerry tries to avoid him, of course, but Kramer finds out that Mike is now a bookie. So, if you ever want to place a bet, he's your guy. So, George, meanwhile, is dating this beautiful woman named Allison. And he has some ball coming up that Steinbrenner's putting together. And he knows that Allison has this black backless dress. And he really wants to make a grand entrance with her. Because he's never made a grand entrance. He's made a grand exit. However, though, she tells George, we need to talk. And George goes, uh-oh. So what does he do? George makes his grand exit, says he has to go get some soda, he'll be right back, and he doesn't go back. He goes to his parents and spends the night, sleeps at his parents that night. And he basically won't go out, he won't answer his phone. We even heard his answer machine going, do, believe it or not, George isn't at home, please leave a message at the beep. I must be out, or I pick up the phone. Where could I be? Believe it or not, I'm not home. And of course, there's a scene where Jerry, of course, calls and George answers, but then he hears another call coming in, so he lets it go to the machine, and it sure enough is Allison. And basically, Allison hates the message. She goes, I know you're avoiding me, but call me at the office. We need to talk. So instead, George calls her home number and says, Allison, sorry, I guess I must have missed you while you were home. Nice hearing from you. Look forward to the ball. Bye. Again, he wants that entrance. After that, he doesn't care if she does or not. But, yeah. So then, I guess also, Allison had access to, like, Knicks tickets or something like that. And Kramer put a bet down for Jerry in his name. And Jerry apparently did get into Kramer got into a fight with one of the players. I think it was Reggie Miller. But it led to, I think, the Knicks winning by 37 points, I think it is. So Jerry won the bet. But then Mike couldn't pay Jerry. He didn't have him the money, which pisses Jerry off. And, of course, Mike offers to help Jerry fix his broken trunk, which Jerry accidentally slams on his thumbs, and Mike breaks his thumbs. And at that point, Mike is terrified of Jerry. And then, of course, Mike says, he'll give Jerry the money, he goes, but also make it up for everything by fixing your trunk. He's like, fine, whatever. Well, then, while he's fixing the trunk, obviously the broken thumbs weren't any help. So then he tries to climb inside the trunk to do the work. But then Kramer backs his car and bumps Jerry's car, which shuts the trunk and locks Mike in. Meanwhile, though, the main story of the show, Elaine was helping some coworker named Peggy, who kept calling Elaine Susie. And Elaine didn't bother to correct her. So the next day, Elaine again was working with Peggy, But she was about to correct her and say that she's Elaine, not Susie. But then Peggy says, you know this Elaine Bennis? And she starts talking trash about Elaine, thinking she's talking to Susie. So then Peterman says he hears that Peggy got into it with a Susie. So he wants a meeting with all three of them. Of course, everyone but Susie shows up. Elaine finds a way out of it, but she's got to find a way for them to realize that Susie's not real, but she's also, offended by what Peggy said about Elaine. So, of course, they were driving the car talking, and then Jerry goes, eliminate her. And then they started laughing because there was some bumper sticker they were laughing at. But, meanwhile, Mike Moffat is still locked in the trunk, but Jerry and Elaine don't know it. They do hear some noise, but Jerry just thinks it's just the trunk creaking and whatnot. So now Mike thinks that Jerry is out to murder someone. Meanwhile, Kramer goes to get another Knicks ticket from Allison. And since Allison can't get a hold of George, she basically breaks up with George through Kramer. Kramer takes George out to a dinner and basically is sitting in Allison's place, basically just advising, that, they think that he's not ready for a serious relationship and whatnot. But then Kramer's acting like George more so broke up with him instead of Allison. So now George is, freaked out because Kramer's acting weird. He's acting, and every time he sees George, he's acting like, they're a broken up couple. Even though, again, the true person George broke up with is Allison. So, but then I guess George, after a while, begged Kramer to give him another chance. And he thought that he got Allison to give him another chance. But what happened was Kramer ended up showing up at the ball. No Allison. And then I think Kramer and George got into a little bit of a fight, and George pushed Kramer. And then Kramer spun and made an entrance, but the back of his suit fell down, so he was backless. And George was credited for a grand entrance, even though Kramer was his partner. It was just hilarious. Anyways, though, getting back to Elaine and Susie, and then of course Jerry and his rivalry with Mike. Elaine then finally just goes to Peterman because Peterman had assigned Susie a project that Elaine wanted to do. And again, at this point, remember, nobody actually met Susie except Peggy thinks Elaine is Susie. But then Elaine says that Susie took her own life. And then Peterman throws a memorial service for her. And so many people show up, but not one of them knew Susie. Not one of them. And I guess when Peterman arrived, when he backed in, he had bumped Jerry's car again, and the trunk opened, and Mike, after probably how many days of being stuck inside there, was free. But of course, he sees the sign for the memorial service, he sees it through, and he thinks that Jerry legitimately did kill Susie. So then, Elaine was supposed to say a eulogy. She had no clue what to say. Peterman interrupts and starts raving about Susie. He even made some comment about how they had an affair together or something like that. It was weird. But once again, how could he make this up when he should realize he's never met Susie? Never in his life. So then, of course, this is also with a bunch of outtakes because Julia Louis-Dreyfus couldn't stop laughing during this. And then, of course, at the end of the eulogy, and of course, well, first off, Peggy was sitting behind Elaine, and she did think Elaine was Susie. And then, of course, when Elaine goes, "No, I'm Elaine," and then Peggy goes, "Oh, I guess I never really met Susie then." And then, of course, after Peterman finishes eulogy, in running comes Mike Moffat, and he goes, wait a minute! Susie didn't commit suicide! She was murdered by Jerry Seinfeld! And of course, earlier, Jerry had turned around and told Peggy, yeah, but at least he didn't sleep with both of them. And Mike, Jerry just laughs, turns around, and tells Peggy, and I also broke both his thumbs too. So, in the last scene, Elaine was in Peterman's office, and she basically tries to explain to Peterman that she is Susie. And then Peterman goes, we both feel the same way. Teasing that he has a romantic interest in Elaine, I guess, but I don't know. But anyways, this was then a whole parody of the was like a parody of what happened to George with the Rosses back in the Foundation. Peterman wants to start a foundation for Susie. And who's he one part of the board of directors? Elaine. And they'll work around her schedule. Nights, weekends, like he had said the same thing that the Rosses told to George. So how do you have to top it off? By having Elaine do exactly what George did with the God! With like the spinning camera above them. Instead, this time, Elaine goes, Suze! So yeah, a simple name error causes a whole big fiasco. And it's important for a woman that clearly never existed. That is the Susie. And I guess Jerry and Mike still have not made up. And I guess they never will. So that's the Susie episode, guys. Not much really fun facts, really. Other than that, the answer machine of George's "Believe It or Not, George" is a parody of the Greatest American Heroes theme song. Basically, that's basically it. That's the Susie. Next up is the Pothole. That one, people said, back in when I listened to the inside look for the parking garage, a lot of people thought that was one of the hardest episodes they did. I think with all the special effects and the crazy shots and some of the crazy scenes they did, the Pothole may be one of the toughest episodes that I think Seinfeld ever did. It was excellent, turned out great, but I feel like putting together was much more of a challenge than a lot of the other episodes. Why is that? We'll talk about that next when we get to the Pothole. So once again, guys, what was your thoughts on the Susie? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video. Subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Until then, guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night. Peace out, everybody.